Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. E.
And I'm Baltimore, the Authenticator, and we have the Duality of Man. And the floor recognizes the gentleman representing the constituency of Bastistan.
Yes, we have Winston Marshall. After going over Nancy Pelosi's, frankly, inane views on populism, about how it's basically just going to be fascistic because apparently people are too stupid to realize a terrible leader who is using them when Nancy Pelosi's whole thing is basically just anti the people.
Also, apparently, the only kind of nationalism that exists in her mind is ethno-nationalism, because apparently only the modern 20th century Germans came up with the concept that nations should exist as separate entities and have fucking borders.
Yeah,
According to
and
according to Nancy Pelosi's definition of derp history.
yeah, and she's saying this because Trump is a populist, and she's basically trying to fearmonger that it's going to be like a white supremacist
Orange
state if he
Hitler!
elects those
Orange
people.
Hitler bad! Derp.
Yeah, completely ignoring the fact that CNN contributor Richard Spencer openly voted for Joe Biden last election.
Yeah, and again, I think I mentioned this the last time. They keep trying this goal because it is literally the only test they ever studied for, because they literally think that their own viewpoint is so sacrosanct that the only people who could possibly disagree with them are the straw man, like uber Nazi, uber fascist demons in their head. So they keep searching in vain for the odd Richard Spencer, and Richard Spencer is all they can find because there simply just are not that many Nazis in the world anymore. And good riddance, by the way. But they keep
But yeah, to
they keep
say,
they keep searching for that Nazi in the haystack because that's the test they studied for, because that's the only people they're actually prepared to rebut, because that's the only people they think should be able to meaningfully disagree with them, because they think their own viewpoint is so sacrosanct that they literally cannot cope with the idea that someone could be both morally valid and also be able to prove them wrong.
and they're gonna say like leftists and their anti-racist policies do a hell of a good job at making people more racist. I've actually seen like because of their policies, because you see people getting off, and because you see the law not being enforced, like you actually see people like becoming more racist because they're pissed off the fact that justice isn't being done.
Because the
They don't.
irony is the only people who benefit from a framework like the ones they have built with social justice are people like Richard Spencer and the EDL on the one hand, and Godzi Kozo and Tariq Nasheed on the other hand.
Yeah, he's like most black people don't like these um policies because when the criminals get let off, like there are a lot of black criminals out there, and also the black community is the one who suffers the most from them. And then it like makes white people feel more racist because they see this black person doing this crime and then getting like let off, and it's almost strictly because he's
And
black.
then they
But
think,
really,
well, maybe I was wrong to treat them like humans. Obviously, they are maybe subhuman, kind of, sort of.
yeah, it's just
Which, by the
let's
way, I
say
do not believe and never will be persuaded to believe. If you if you hadn't clued to the fact that I've done several hundred episodes with Mr. E as my co-host here.
yeah, like your viewpoints I'm not concerned about, but I've seen like, a lot of people online who I feel are becoming more racist like because of this, because they see injustice being done, and it's being dispensed at on a racial bias.
Yeah,
But I feel like we're getting off on a tangent
yeah,
here.
yeah. But yeah, anyway, let's defer to the gentleman from Base to Stand, please.
Yes, Winston Marshall.
Populism is not a threat to democracy. Populism is democracy.
So based and objectively
And
I now
correct.
look to Mr. Winston Marshall
yes,
to close the case for the opposition.
have a tendency to change meaning. When I was a boy, woman meant someone who didn't have a cock. Populism has become a word used synonymously with racist, we've heard ethno-nationalist, with bigot, with hillbilly, redneck, with deplorables. Elites use it to show their contempt for ordinary people. This is a recent change. Not long ago, Barack Obama, while still president at the North America's Leaders Summit in June 2016, he took umbrage with the notion that Trump be called a populist. How could Trump be called a populist? He doesn't care about working people. If anything, Obama argued he was the populist.
I gotta say, like, ever since he's gotten out of office, Barack Obama has proven himself to be a disgusting elitist.
Well, I mean, yes, but I will give it to him, and I will give it to Winston for bringing this up. The arguing over who is the better populist is a far more constructive conversation than populism is a synonym for fascism, so despise it with every fiber of your being, derp.
Yes, and I'm glad how he mentioned the fact that like the people who despise populism also tend to try and manipulate language, alter the meanings of things, or say you shouldn't use one word and use another while that other word is like loaded with like political baggage.
Yeah. Cough, cough, social justice, cough. Neo-Hegelianism, cough.
These are the same people that tried to push Latinx, which is absolutely absurd.
Yeah, the word you were looking for that is the neutral version of this is Latin with no suffix. Because the A is a suffix denoting femininity, the O is a suffix denoting maleness. So just drop the modifiers altogether and use the neutral term Latin, and there you go. There's your gender neutral equivalent word.
It's not enough to just use a neutral word that already exists. They have to invent their own word loaded with their beliefs and their politics.
It's not enough to simply be neutral. They actually have to create like an airtight vacuum in the fabric of concepts.
Yes, because when you say Latin, you just know that you're using the neutral term. But when you say Latinx, you know that you're also like agreeing to
fitting it in a
values.
political framework. Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Anyway,
If
yeah,
anything,
banana.
Obama argued Bernie was the populist. It was Bernie who'd spent 5 decades fighting for working people. But Trump. Something curious happens. If you watch Obama's speeches after that point, more and more recently, he uses the word populist interchangeably with strongman, with authoritarian. The word changes meaning. It becomes a negative, a pejorative, a slur. To me, populism is not a dirty word. Since the 2008 crash, and specifically the trillion-dollar Wall Street bailout, we are in the populist age, and for good reason.
Based.
Yeah, like the bailout for Wall Street after the economic recession in 2008. Like, I remember everybody in my school, my parents, my aunts and uncles, my teachers, everybody thought that was absolutely disgusting.
Which is why Occupy, around that same time, was a politically all-encompassing outfit as long as you were populist. It didn't matter whether you were populist right sort of libertarians or whether you were populist left pseudo Bernie bros. You found a place in Occupy as long as you could see your fellow populist as your fellow, lower classman, and you both could see yourselves as opposed to the elites. Which, to me, as a left-leaning populist, as I am, as someone who voted for Bernie Sanders both times, and whose second and third choices the last time around were Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard, I find that to be far more constructive. I find it much more sane to look at my more right-leaning libertarian cohorts and seeing them as equally human and finding the common ground of it's you and me versus the new aristocracy than I do quibbling over, well, yeah, but what happens after we win? I don't fucking care what happens after we win. We can address that once we've won. And the more we tear each other apart on the grounds of, well, your ideology isn't as pure and undiluted and sacrosanct as mine is, therefore, grr. That's just a ruse to keep us from winning, keep us from uniting as populists against the elites or against the aristocracy. And whose ends do you think that serves? Certainly not ours, in my way of thinking.
Yeah, here's the thing, like, a populist movement in the United States has an opportunity to do something kind of what the founding fathers did. Kick out the assholes that are causing the problems and then debate on a solution. But the thing is, we have now been so divided that we can't even accomplish the first part, which is, kicking out the assholes. And so we're sitting here arguing about a solution that we'll never have the chance to implement because the assholes are going to remain in power so long as we keep arguing with each other.
Yeah, because the left-leaning populists, by and large, have started seeing their right-leaning libertarian interlocutors as fascist by default, and it must be said that, not without reason, mind you, but it must be said that a large percentage of the right-leaning libertarian populists see any left-wing populist as a Antifa anarcho-communist in the making, which again is not without reason, but it does make seeing each other as equally valid and equally human mighty difficult when one side is yelling "fuck you fascist" and the other side is yelling "get fucked communist" over and over again.
Well, I would see that a bit of the difference is that, like, the fascistic elements on the right were largely and almost universally stomped out, whereas the communistic factions on the left seem to have a pretty
were lionized. Yeah. When Richard Spencer showed up in 2017, 2018, he was summarily mocked by basically everyone except for maybe, was it Edgy Spinks? It was him, JF Garapi, and Edgy Spinks, right? That were the actual, for real, not relabeling alt-right for a while.
I believe so.
Or was it Baked Alaska who I'm misremembering who the third one was, but I know that for a while it was Richard Spencer and JF Garapi that were the actual no cap, no cope, actually identifying themselves as alt-right. And they were all summarily mocked as basically childish wannabe cartoon supervillains that even Dr. Doofenshmirtz and Dr. Draken would find cringy. Whereas Antifa literally got treated like the sit-in Summer of Love 1960s types by everyone from MSNBC to CNN to freaking Wall Street Journal and so on. So yes, it is obviously biased in one way, and that makes me all the more determined as a left-leaning populist to hold the line as a left-wing populist, because I've started seeing a lot of people on the right side of libertarianism or populism say things like, it is literally and categorically impossible to have a left-wing libertarian, and that only authoritarians exist on the left, which is, of course, correspondingly exactly what the left thinks about the right. There is no such thing as a libertarian right-winger. There must only be fascists. Dirt. And in both cases, these people are wrong.
Well, that's obviously untrue. Although I do feel that the left has become increasingly authoritarian over the years.
Well, because in the 90s and early 2000s, they won the argument, but they never actually grew the responsibility necessary to have won the argument. So they still act as though they are rebelling against the far-flung TradCon order of 30, 40, 50 years ago, when all the while the tradcons have been reduced to either a fringe of a fringe of a fringe or a laughingstock. Same thing with the actual alt-right, the Richard Spencer and J.F. Garapees of the world. Were a laughingstock, are a laughingstock, and were ironically taken more seriously by the establishment left than they were by the dissident right or the dissident left or the dissident center, because, as I mentioned previously, that is the test they studied for. They were looking for Nazis very, very hard because they genuinely believe their framework is so sacrosanct that the only people who could possibly disagree with them are Nazis, fascists, and other assorted morally invalid ne'er-do-wells. But unfortunately for them, there's not enough of those, so they had to keep reusing the ones they did find, which was Richard Spencer and J.F. Garapy. I don't even know what happened to JF. Does anybody know what happened to JF? I know Richard Spencer became an NBC and or CNN contributor, but I don't think anything meaningful happened to JF Garapy. Did it?
I don't remember what happened to him, but I do want to say that I feel the tradcon movement is increasing as of late because here's the thing: like so many people nowadays are complaining that they feel, you know, isolated and without purpose and meaning, while the tradcons are saying, "Hey, you should get married and have a family." And I said that I agree with those things, but the marriage laws are a big problem, which you said on previous podcasts. But here's the thing: it seems like the left has like given the position of wanting a family and wanting purpose. It seems like they've just given that over, like they've given that ground to the right, as
Yeah,
if they're
because
the only
they think
ones.
it's fascist and they think fascism is right wing, therefore everything that is biologically and psychologically normal for a human being is just softcore fascism now. Unfortunately, for those of us who want to see a sensible return of those values without all the baggage, for every one reasonable tradcon, you get 10 Gavin McGinnis's or Matt Walsh's going, that thing you like, that thing that gives your life meaning outside of working yourself to death, it's satanic, or immoral, or invalid, or derp, 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 derp. Suffering is
Here's,
good, pleasure is bad, okay.
here's the thing. I feel like a lot of people do what I do. Like when they have a good point, they listen, accept and agree with the good point, and then when they say something stupid, they just fucking ignore it.
Which
That's at
I
very
do,
least what I do.
yeah, I do enjoy it whenever even Matt Walsh's audience, whenever he pulls the entertaining yourself is for wimps grr thing, his entire audience just lambasts him and end up probably going over to Andrew Tate. Which this is the virtue that Andrew Tate has that most of the Gavin McGinnis's and Matt Walsh's don't have. He actually understands the notion that people want nice things for the sake of having the nice things and using the nice things, not just to spite the people who don't want them to have nice things. And so he has no problem saying anime is cool or like waifus are cool or whatever the fuck. Whereas somebody like Matt Walsh won't consider it a victory until all the fun shit that he doesn't like or doesn't understand is thrown out with all the other leftist nonsense, quote unquote.
Well, normal people. The thing is, there are a lot of animes with messages that conservatives would like. But the thing is, I feel like the people with like Matt Walsh is that like with a lot of conservatives, they are very slow to adapt new mediums.
Yeah. And there's also the suffering is good for its own sake brigade in that part of the right as well. Not suffering is a necessary evil we must fortify ourselves against and overcome and make life easier by our own innovations and our own merits, but suffering itself is actually some kind of spiritual, almost Buddhist good in and of itself to a lot of people, which you're never going to win with that argument, guys. Suffering is not good. It is what is known as a necessary evil. It is something you should steel yourself against. It is something to struggle against and overcome. It is not a virtue in and of itself. Anyway, back to Winston's point.
All right.
The elites have failed. Let me address some common fallacies, some of which have been made tonight. If the motion was that demagoguery was a threat to democracy, I would be on that side of the House. If the motion was that political violence was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. January 6th has been mentioned. A dark day for America indeed. And I'm sure Congresswoman Pelosi will agree that the entire month of June 2020, when the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon was under siege and under insurrection by radical progressives, those two were dark days for America.
No, she won't.
Yes?
There is no equivalence there.
So you don't agree?
Oh my God.
She could not help herself.
I like you and I both knew what her actual answer to that was going to be, but I didn't think she was actually going to literally be like there is no equivalent. Okay. Also, Winston, I love you. I do, but January 6th was a fairly moderate protest, sir. It was if you really want to be uncharitable to it, you can call it a riot. If you really want to be uncharitable to it. But it was not and never will be some kind of insurrection. The people who got into the Capitol were led in and shepherded into the Capitol, and a lot of them stayed within the spectator ropes that are set up for tourists. So yeah, no. I agree actually with Mrs. Pelosi's statement that there is no equivalency here, but I find myself on the opposite side of it. I'm standing over there with you, where it's like, no, Antifa bashing Portland down or burning their own cities down is not a good thing, but I don't think it's equivalent to January 6th, because the only person who died or got severely injured in January the 6th was a woman by the name of Ashley Babbitt, who died of pre-existing conditions the day after January 6th, or was it 2 days after? But regardless, unlike the average Antifa. Sorry.
Oh, no, I can put it. Ashley Babbitt was shot by a police officer on January the 6th. There was a police officer who died a few days later, but the coroner's report said that they were unrelated to any injuries he got on January 6th.
Yeah. Okay. Also, the average Antifa riots, and we can ask Andy No for clarification here, because Andy No has been put in intensive care, I believe, twice by Antifa during one of their things. Also, I really wish you hadn't made this parallel between January the 6th and the various activities of Antifa, because then you could have asked Ms. Pelosi to come to the defense of Antifa and why Antifa, especially during the George Floyd protest, was treated as a, quote, summer of love style protest, whereas January the 6th is treated as an insurrection, even though it was far less severe than most of the protests that occurred under the aegis of the George Floyd incident. How many buildings were burnt down by the January 6th? See, exactly 0. How many buildings were burnt down during the George Floyd tenure? I literally don't think I could count them all, but there were a bunch. Most of them were black-owned businesses, but, que sera, sera.
Not only that, but in a recent video, Pelosi admitted that the situation with January 6th was her fault because, again, Trump offered her National Guard because there were a lot of people there. Yeah, and she declined. So, if anyone's to blame for January 6th.
Also, let's take one of the worst examples of the George Floyd adjacent summer of love, shall we? Let's take the Chaz, also known as the Chop. For a little bit less than a month, for just about 3 weeks, an entire capital city or an entire Capitol Hill in Seattle was treated as a politically captured, almost new country or nascent state. January 6th lasted for all of 4 or 5 hours, and there was no major property damage to speak of. And at no point was the Capitol Hill on January 6th treated as its own separate sovereign state, or a large-scale enough protest that it could be considered its own sovereign state for the duration. And it only lasted a couple hours.
I mean, hell, the campus chaos from the Palestine protests lasted longer than January 6th.
Yes. And yet, somehow, not only is Nancy Pelosi going to say that there's no equivalence between those two things, she's actually going to play on hard mode and say that January 6th was somehow worse than the Chaz Chop situation or any given Antifa episode in Portland wherein Andy No gets put in intensive care, etc. Which is straight back to front the opposite of reality. Anyway, moving on.
Yep.
That's fine. You don't agree. That's fine.
But it is not like what happened on January 6th, which was an insurrection incited by the president.
Nancy, it's not your turn.
So you don't agree. But you'll condemn those days. My point, though, is that all political movements are susceptible to violence and indeed insurrection. And if we were arguing that fascism was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. Indeed, the current populist age is a movement against fascism.
Based.
I've got quite a lot to get through. Populism, as you know, is the politics of the ordinary people against an elite. Populism is not a threat to democracy. Populism is democracy. And why else have universal suffrage if not to keep elites in check?
So
Ladies
based.
and gentlemen,
I love this guy.
given the success of Trump, and more recently Javier Milei taking a chainsaw to the state behemoth of our...
God, I hope Trump pulls him away whenever he comes back in office.
Not
Just take a
only
chainsaw to the federal government.
not only do I hope Trump pulls a Milei, I want Trump to be in meetings with Milei. I want those two to become as thick as thieves. Throw in what's his name in El Salvador too, why don't you? Just
Yeah.
all the populist politicians. They need to form their own little cabal, their own little circle, just to own literally everyone who is not a populist. Please, I want it. I want it so badly.
I mean, Marie Le Pen is on the surge, is surging in France. Maybe we could get her in there as well.
Giorgio Meloni, Nigel Farage, David Rees-Mogg, Geert Wilders, I want to say, is the guy from Hungary.
Who's the president of Italy?
I
I heard that she was pretty based.
Giorgia Meloni.
Ah, right. I was about to say Tifa Lockhart, but
no. But yeah, get some AfD politicians over there. Why not? Like, you know that all of the elitists and the anti-populists are going to be caballing to their heart's content. Why not make the ultimate power move and get in good with all the, the surging populists? I am sure that Nigel Farage and Javier Milei would take a meeting. I'm pretty sure that also extends to the guy from El Salvador, and I'm pretty sure that would include Ms. Maloney as well. Not to mention, meeting with Nigel Farage would serve double the purpose, because that would mean that America could sublimate the UK's trading partners and alleviate some of the economic pressure of Brexit, which would show the Remainers who's boss as well as owning the elitists.
yeah, if they could form their own bloc, like if like say Trump were to get America to help improve these countries, you could have a strong new trading partners.
Yeah. And the more successful the populists are when they're in power, the more easy it's going to be convincing people that voting populist is the correct thing to do. And the more butthurt the elitist twats will get. And I like me some butthurt elitist twats. It is the best use of elitist twats, in my opinion, to torture their butts repeatedly. Giggity.
All right, it didn't play.
Argentina's bureaucratic monster, you'd be mistaken for thinking this was a right-wing populist age. But that would be ignoring Occupy Wall Street. That would be ignoring Jeremy Corbyn's For the Many, Not the Few. That would be ignoring Bernie against the billionaires, RFK Jr. against Big Pharma, and more recently, George Galloway against his better judgment. Now,
okay, well played, sir. That one is one for the history book.
I'm unfamiliar with George Galloway. Explain, please.
He's a British politician and a bit of a twat. He's basically kind of similar to Tony Blair, as far as I understand.
Ah, got it. But
all of them, including Galloway, recognize genuine concerns of ordinary people being otherwise ignored by the establishment. I'm actually rather surprised that our esteemed opposition, Congressman Pelosi, is on that side of the motion. I thought the left was supposed to be anti-elite. I thought the left was supposed to be anti-establishment. Today, particularly in America, the globalist left have become the establishment. I suppose for Ms. Pelosi to have taken this side of the motion, she'd be arguing herself out of a job. But it's here in Britain where right and left populists united for the supreme act of democracy, Brexit. Polls have showed the number one reason people voted for Brexit was sovereignty, for more democracy.
Is this guy a dragon? Because he keeps spitting fire and it's getting very hot in this room.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have a whole lot to say, as he keeps just saying it for me.
But in all seriousness, this is actually a very interesting point for me to make as someone who leans very left but is also very libertarian. The reason I am opposed to most of my own side on many issues is because back in the 80s, in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the left were the libertarian space. They were the people fighting for free speech against moral grandstanding and moral authoritarianism. The difference is that in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, and to some extent the early 2000s, the left was very libertarianly minded, was very much a fuck your moral order, fuck your moral censorship. I'm going to say exactly what you don't want me to say because it is true and relevant. However, the modern day left, as Winston points out, became the establishment. Many parts of the left appear to have missed the memo that they became the establishment, and that's why they still act like radicals, even though they have all the force of the establishment behind them. But this is also why I ended up essentially committing treason against my own side in a lot of ways. Because when I was saying things like, fuck your moral order, fuck your moral censorship, I'm going to say exactly what I want to say because it is true and relevant, and specifically because you don't want me to say it. I was serious when I said that. A large part of the left appears to have been using that only as a thin veneer and a tactic. And that's why I oppose a large sum of the current left. Because When I said I don't want anyone's moral order being enforced from on high, I meant I don't want anyone's moral order being enforced on high, not just the people I don't like. For a lot of the left, it seems like they can see what's morally wrong with the morally overbearing tradcons, but they can't see what's morally wrong with the overbearing academic social justice warriors. And I fundamentally disagree. I do see the connection between those two things. It doesn't matter to me that they're pointing in two different directions as far as which wing of politics they're aiming at. When I say I don't like moralistic authoritarianism, I mean it as a universal standard. I don't like moralistic authoritarianism, full stop. So whenever comes the moralistic authoritarianism, I will oppose. And currently, most of the moralistic authoritarianism, I stress most because there are still the occasional Gavin McGinnis or Matt Walsh, but most of the moral authoritarianism and the power to enforce it in an establishment context is coming from the left currently.
Well, here's the thing. Like, with the one thing that's worst is than an overbearing moral authority is an overbearing moral authority that assumes it's rebelling against what their enemy, who they presume to be the moral authority. Like, these people don't get it that they are the ones who are in charge and who control the establishment and control, or at least trying to control, the Overton window. And here's the thing: a lot of the younger generation are now rebelling very hard against them because they've been in charge for so long that they're the only overbearing moral authority that the younger generation have ever known.
Yeah,
And I would
because
here's the thing.
the youth always sides in favor of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. In like the Bush years and the years prior to the Bush years, the thing that was preventing people's freedom of speech was overbearing, censorious evangelical tradcons. But now it's overbearing pseudo-academic institutions buttressed by social justice, neo-Hegelianism, the Frankfurt School, and so on.
Here's the thing: I would argue that it's worse than what it used to be because it's, I believe, more prolific. Like, when you had the overbearing Christian moral authority, you could escape to other places. You could escape to, say, video games or comics or movies. Like, you had your little spaces where you could escape that from. But with this, like, they are
They
literally
infect all
freaking
the areas you
everywhere.
would escape from. Yeah.
Yes, like,
I think it's
there's no
also partly worse because the overbearing Christian sort of moralism was around a lot longer than social justice or neo-Hegelianism has been, in the sense that their peak of authoritarianism was during like the Inquisition or the Burning Times. So the stuff we dealt with in the 20th century, especially the latter part of it, was the most watered down version of that censoriousness it could be. Whereas current day social justice is still very much the baby on the block with regards to like historical time frames. So it hasn't yet hit its Inquisition period or its burning times. I really would rather it not get there because I don't want to get burnt on a stake, regardless of who's doing it. But it does very much seem that one of the reasons why the like 70s, 80s, and 90s tradcons were a lot less severe and a lot more complacent than the modern day social justice left is because the peak of Christian moralism happened 500 or 600 years ago, whereas the peak of social justice moralism arguably hasn't even happened yet.
yeah,
Which is somewhat
these people
scary if
really
you actually think about it in those terms.
yeah, these people really haven't affected like almost anything. Like, I tried to listen to some modern punk, and it's fucking cringe.
Yeah, because a lot of the left still thinks they're the put upon rebel, even as they stand atop the tip of the ivory tower. That's why a
I,
lot of this dissonance is happening, because they're still using the tools of the radical but they're using the tools of the radical with all the force of the establishment. And I've mentioned this dichotomy or useful rule of thumb that I use a lot of times, which is when the rebels behave like rebels, that is things functioning as they should. When the establishment behaves like rebels, that is the very definition of tyranny. When the establishment order still uses these most severe tools of the rebels, that's how you get tyranny. That's how you get gulags and concentration camps and so on and so forth.
Yeah, like we already like the modern social justice movement has a lot of components of communism within it, and we've already seen how that plays out. So I feel like we know where the absolute extremes could go. We're just wondering which are the scythe will slice.
Yeah, whether we'll wind up in a 1984 style future or whether we wind up in a Brave New World style future, that's basically the question at this point.
Yeah, or it could end up like Fahrenheit 451.
Honestly, I think we're already kind of flirting with that. And I still think that Demolition Man is probably a likely scenario. I mean, it was set in 2032, and that's what, 8 years from now? Yeah, 8 years from now.
And I mean, that does make a lot of sense. They are trying to take away people's right to be assholes.
Yes, and I'm on the side of Edgar Friendly, Simon Phoenix, and John Spartan in this sense. How dare you? That is one of the most fundamental rights of any human being. You cannot take away people's rights to be assholes.
All right, hitting play.
Yeah, next.
The response of the Brussels elite, they did everything in their power to undermine the democratic will of the British people, and the Westminster elite were just as disgraceful. As we've heard, David Cameron called the voters fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racists. The Liberal Democrats did everything they could to overturn a democratic vote. Keir Starmer campaigned for a second referendum. Elites would have had us voting and voting and voting until we voted their way. Indeed, that's what happened in Ireland and in Denmark. Let's look at some of the other populist movements. The Hong Konger populist revolt is literally called the pro-democracy movement. The farmer revolts from Netherlands to Germany, France, Greece to Sri Lanka. Farmers are taking their tractors to the road to protest ESG policy that's floated down to us from those all-knowing, infallible elites of Davos. The trucker movement in Canada became anti-elitist when petty tyrant Prime Minister Justin Trudeau froze their bank accounts, not the behavior of a democratic head of state. The Gilets jaunes in France, ULEZ in London, working people protesting policy that hurt them. And how are they treated? They're called conspiracy theorists. They're called far right by the mayor as well.
I mean, do we even need to say anything? That's just correct. Like,
Yes,
rubber stamp that
true.
statement, move on. Like,
Yes, that opinion is approved by the duality of men.
seriously, if we ever do like mugs or beanies or anything, we're gonna have to put that on a t-shirt or something. Like, god damn it.
Like it really just does sum up everything. All the different movements that he mentioned, like were the genuine, like working people, like fighting for their freedom and liberty.
The only way this could get better is if he mentioned some of the pop culture ones like Gamergate, Comicsgate, the Fandom Menace, etc. That's literally the only thing that could make this better, is if he pointed out those as well.
I don't know if he will. I think that's too much in a microcosm of.
Yeah, it might be a little bit too niche for his taste. I'm just saying. Right now we have a 9 out of 10 on the base score, if he mentions Gamergate, Comicsgate, and the Phantom Menace, I think we might have an honest 10 out of 10.
Yeah. Or in play.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, populism is the voice of the voiceless. The real threat to democracy is from the elites. Now, don't get me wrong, we need elites. If President Biden has shown us anything, we need someone to run the countries. When the president has severe dementia, it's not just America that crumbles, the whole world burns.
And I just want to point out, like, he mentioned Biden having dementia. Like, everybody in the news, they couldn't see it until that debate a couple of days ago. But this guy mentioned it weeks ago because people freaking saw it. You were literally the only ones who were pretending this didn't exist.
Yeah, you were literally sat there with your fingers in your ears going, la 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 la, we can't hear you, fascist. And all the while, the world still... I'm gonna borrow a phrase from Dr. Randomacam, because he pointed this out several years ago, and I think it's still applicable here. These people have not emotionally matured to the point that they think peekaboo still works. Like, in the way that children think that peekaboo works. The whole, if I can't see you or hear you, then you must not exist thing. But the thing is, the people you blocked from your social media spheres, the people you blocked from public speech, the people you blocked from whatever things and gated communities you could get away with blocking them from, were not in turn blocked from the entire goddamn universe.
Yeah, and like the funny thing is that Pelosi's literally right there. And then she went on a few days after the debate and tried to gaslight the American people into thinking that Biden didn't have dementia and that he was just having a cold or an off night. Like, her
Who are you going to believe? The establishment narrative or your lying eyes?
I am just really glad that we have gotten past this point of pretending this doesn't exist, because that was honestly one of the most annoying things. It's like, it's so freaking obvious, but you people won't admit it. Well,
I'm still waiting for the yes, it's true and it's a good thing portion of the conversation, because you know it's coming.
Yeah. All right, hit and play.
Yep.
But let's examine the elites. European corporations spend over 1 billion euros a year lobbying Brussels. US corporations spend over $2 billion a year lobbying in DC. 2/3 of Congress receive funding from pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer alone spent $11 million in 2021. They made over $10 billion in profit. No wonder then that 66% of Americans think the economy is rigged against them for the rich and the powerful. And by the way, we used to have a word for when big business and big government were in cahoots. And I think any students here of early 20th century Italian history know what I'm talking about.
Oh, he's doing this thing now.
What about big tech? Throughout the pandemic, Biden's team, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security colluded with big tech in censoring dissenting voices, not kooky conspiracy theorists. People like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the Stanford epidemiologist. People like Harvard scientist Martin Kulldorff. People spreading true information, not misinformation, true information at odds with the government narrative.
I mean, I feel like we should pause, but he's just saying everything I agree
Yeah,
with.
he's continue to speak the truth, sir. Like, again, is this guy like descended from dragons or something? Like, is Fafnir somewhere in his family tree? Because he keeps spitting so much fire. I'm honestly worried about the building burning down.
I mean, he's cooking. Let him cook.
Freaking Auguste Escoffier over here with the level of cooking he's doing.
I mean, I'm also really glad that he mentioned the Twitter files, because like that was another big moment where we finally got the evidence of something that like half the population already knew, and the other population like denied vehemently.
Yeah, again, he's up to about a 9.5. Let's see if he'll bring up Gamergate and Comicsgate and the rest, and he'll get it to a full 10 out of 10.
I still say that's a bit too niche.
Right, but this is literally the only nit I can possibly pick at this point. Again, he's spitting so much fire, it's a wonder the building doesn't burn down.
All right, in play.
Need I remind you, democracy without free speech is not democracy. This was a direct breach, by the way, of the First Amendment. Before COVID, intelligence services colluded with big tech to have Trump suspended off Twitter. Yes, the same platform which hosted the Taliban and Ayatollah deaf to Israel Khomeini, they thought the president crossed the line when he tweeted on Jan 6th, quote, "Remain peaceful, no violence, respect the law and our great men and women in blue." That's a quote. You may be thinking now that Trump is a populist. You are right. He didn't accept the 2020 elections, and he should have. So should Hillary in 2016, so should Brussels, and so should Westminster in 2016, and so too should Congresswoman Pelosi, instead of saying the 2016 election was, quote, hijacked.
I mean, again, do we even need to be here? But goddamn, he went there. Like, because
she's replying. She's replying. Let me...
Thank you.
Like, she just walked right into it.
Well, but that's the thing. For all of the shit that Trump and the MAGA populists are getting for not believing unquestioningly in 2020 election and shit, do we not remember the Trump-Russia possible collusion supercut on every freaking news network? Do we not remember basket of deplorables? Do we not remember Russia for the 4 years between 2016 and 2020?
Did you see the did you see the supercut of all the local news networks saying literally the exact same thing, word for word?
Yeah, Trump, Russia, possible collusion. Trump, Russia, definite collusion. Blah blah blah. Blah. Yeah, supercut.
Like this is. They also this is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. And then it's just like a whole feed of them all saying.
And like even people I otherwise respect, namely Dev from Short Fat Otaku, will rant and rave and wax absolute lyrical about how Trump tried to steal the 2020 election, argle, florgle, blorgle, January 6th, argle, florgle, blorgle. But he never mentions the 4 fucking years between 2016 and 2020 when the Democratic Party line was Trump, Russia, possible collusion, Trump, Russia, definite collusion, dangerous to our democracy. Like, there were literal supercuts of different journalistic outlets made, some of which included quotes from Hillary goddamn Clinton or indeed Nancy Pelosi, as Winston is pointing out here. Like, good goddamn, like, I'm all for saying that it was silly for Trump to deny the 2020 election, but are we not going to hold the Clinton News Network accountable for Trump, Russia, possible collusion for fucking... Does anyone remember the Golden Shower dossier that the media honestly ran with because Trump, Russia, possible collusion?
I remember it. I had forgotten about it. Jesus.
And yet Hillary, Pelosi, and every goddamn major news network under the sun can scream Trump, Russia, possible collusion, dangerous to our democracy. He's trying to tell people what to think, and that's our job for 4 fucking years. And apparently Dev just completely forgot that any of that happened. But then, when Trump even approaches the possibility that maybe the numbers look a little bit funny, he's unfit to be president because fascists are derp or something.
I just want to throw this out there. I don't think it is all that important that a person accepts the result of the election, so long as they adhere to the results of the elections. You could rail against it all you want. You can present every legal challenge you want and use every tool in the books we have to contest an election that you want.
Yeah,
But here's the
because
thing: even if you don't like it, even if you don't necessarily accept it and think you were cheated, so long as you are willing to adhere to the results, I think that is what is most important.
yeah, I agree. I don't, and this is the other thing. If the if the results are secure, if there's no danger of being overturned, then what the fuck do you care that some people think it was illegitimate? Now, mind you, it's still hilarious to point out the hypocrisy of 4 years of Trump Russia possible collusion, followed by 4 years of maybe those voting totals were sketchy, and people not noticing the parallel. But as long as like things carry on as normal and the torch gets passed regardless, who the fuck cares? And as the Patriot Act was fond of pointing out, if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear from inquiries and investigations, do you? If you're so absolutely sure that nothing possibly happened, what then why are you going full Wizard of Oz and saying don't pay attention to that man behind the curtain? Could it be because actually there's slightly more evidence, such as say the New York Times admitting it openly and publicly so that they could get their requisite back pats and pats on the head for doing a good thing?
No,
Could that
I think it was
possibly
Time
be a thing
Magazine.
that's worth considering? Hmm.
To be more exact, I think it was Time Magazine, the shadow campaign.
Hmm.
Um, right up. I think that was Time Magazine.
Yeah, but yeah, the yes, we fortified the election and that's a good thing article. But yeah,
Yeah,
in a world where there was actually no basis for this bullshit, that article could not exist. Not just would not exist, but could not exist. But it not only can, it does exist. So when people tell you, yes, we did this and that's a good thing and we want pats on the head and back pats for it, you can't just pretend like the people running the fucking Time magazine are some crazy conspiracy theorist whack jobs. They're not Alex fucking Jones. When you admit to the quiet part out loud, you can't just say that you never said anything. You morons. Moving on.
yeah. I also would find it hilarious that people just dismiss the idea of a conspiracy theory just completely out of hand. Like some of them, yes, are completely out there, but like to like think that like the government is never conspiring against you at all. Like you clearly know nothing about the government or have never read
Especially
anything about history.
especially when those very same people who poo-poo conspiracy theories like they're going out of style will unironically and straight-facedly blame shit on the capitalist industrial complex and or the patriarchy. Like, I'm fine with a person who just straight up doesn't believe in conspiracy theories full stop. That's at least consistent. But somebody who believes in patriarchy theory or communist economic models don't have a leg to stand on. If you believe in the patriarchy, but you don't believe in the corrupt politicianarchy, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Just like if you're one of the more like one of the more crazy wackadoos on the other side who believe that every politician is a secret Satanist and are secretly being puppeteered by the devil or some shit. If you don't believe in the patriarchy, you shouldn't have any basis for believing in the Satanarchy. And if you do believe in the Satanarchy, then you have no leg to stand on when the feminist whack jobs say everything they're patriarchy. Because
Yes.
the thing is, I go where the evidence points me to go, and when the evidence points me in places, what I have found is that there's no basis for any sort of grand conspiracy except those with actual paper trails. And the ones with actual paper trails are the hedonistic pedoarchy, a la Jeffrey Epstein. That actually exists. That I'm willing to concede actually exists because it has a paper trail. But
Yeah,
as far as either
the
the
Satan stuff.
patriarchy or the
Um,
Satanarchy goes, yeah, no, I don't see any evidence of either of those.
yeah, the Satan cabal thing is just outright ludicrous. They're not Satanists. They are evil, but you don't need to be a Satanist to be evil.
No, they're just hedonists. They don't do things because of some grand opposition to morality. They do things because it's fun and they engage in naked hedonism. Because they can, because they're too rich and too bored to be stimulated by normal shit.
There's actually a boss fight in 40K the Rogue Trade, the video game, where you literally have to fight against a planetary governor who is a hedonistic Slaaneshi cultist.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't yeah, to all the Satanarchy believers out there, they don't diddle kids because of some kind of child sacrifice. They diddle kids because they think it's fun and they're hedonists. They don't need any grand motive. They just need basic pleasure and no personal restraint or enough wealth to buy their way out of personal restraint.
Moving on.
Yep, moving on.
What about the mainstream media? Let me read you some mainstream media headlines. The New Yorker, the day before the 2016 election. The case against democracy. The Washington Post, the day after the election. The problem with our government is democracy. The LA Times, June 2017. The British election is a reminder of the perils of too much.
Bring up the New York Times. Bring up the New York Times. Bring up the New York
Fox,
Times.
June 2017. The two
Or the
eminent political scientists
Time
say the
magazine,
problem with
whatever.
democracy is voters. New York Times, June 2017. The problem with participatory democracy is the participants. Mainstream media elites are part of a class who don't just disdain populism, they disdain the people. If the Democrats had put half their energy into delivering for the people, Trump wouldn't even have a chance in 2024. He shouldn't have a chance. You've had power for 4 years. From the fabricated Steele dossier to trying to take him off the ballot in both Maine and Colorado, the Democrats are the anti-Democrat party. All we need now is the Republicans to come out as the pro-monarchist party. Ladies and gentlemen, populism is not a threat to democracy, but I'll tell you what is. It's elites ordering social media to censor political opponents. It's police shutting down dissenters, be it anti-monarchists in this country or gender-critical voices here, or last week in Brussels, the National Conservative movement. I'll tell you what is a threat to democracy. It's Brussels, DC, Westminster, the mainstream media, big tech, big pharma, corporate collusion, and the Davos cronies. The threat to democracy comes from those who write off ordinary people as deplorable. The threat to democracy comes from those who smear working people as racist. The threat to democracy comes from those who write off working people as populists. And I'll say one last thing. This populist age can be brought to an end at the snap of a finger. All that needs to be done is for elites to start listening to, respecting, and, God forbid, working for ordinary people. Thank you.
I mean, that's literally what democracy and democratic republics are for. So you would think that would be the obvious duh position, but as we just went over, it very much is not. I really wish he had pulled the play from my book and gone into the etymology of the words, because had he gone into the etymology of the words, I think he would have come to the same conclusion that I do, which is populus and demos, i.e. the root word for populism and the root word for democracy, are the same word in Latin and Greek respectively.
Yeah.
So to be anti-populist as a Democrat is to be a freaking self-collapsing black hole of wrong, basically.
Yeah, but the sad thing is that according to the Oxford Union, he lost that debate, which is absolutely ridiculous. Although not surprising.
Because Oxford Union is an institution, and therefore they are, much like my friend Dev, so blinded by the glory of normative institutions, they literally can't see the benefits of paradigm shifts.
Hold on. You are pixelating and roboting, and it appears that I'm having some connectivity issues on my end. So let's wrap this up before we get more connectivity issues.
Yep.
Do you have any final words regarding the position of Mr. Winston Marshall?
Normative institutions need to be overhauled, and the more you resist them being overhauled, the harder the reset is going to have to be when it finally becomes time. So if you don't want normative institutions to collapse into Weimar Germany anarchy, you have to actually listen to populist voices before they become actually authoritarian voices. Because the more you resist them, the harder and more radicalized they're going to have to be.
Yeah, I would argue that no institution created by man should be above radical change or even destruction when necessary.
Yep.
Like a lot of these people seem to treat their institutions as if they're like sacred artifacts. But
Mm-hmm.
if an institution doesn't serve the purpose that it was set out to address,
It's
then it's
dilapidated
literally
and
just
defunct.
yes, it's literally just a waste of money, and you got to get rid of it and replace it with something that actually can address the issue. But these people will never do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody. I've been Mr. E.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Man. Vox Populi, Vox Dei.
Bye, everybody.